Good afternoon, everyone. Country Flyboy here, and today, VFR Sectionals. Alright, so today we're going to be going over how to read VFR Sectionals. Now, I personally find these harder to read than the en route charts because there's so much information on here. They are trying to put a lot of info on here. We're going to be specifically talking about VFR Sectionals. We may mention a few other VFR charts, but we're going to go over the different things you find on a VFR sectional. So real quick, let me get these out the way. These are shown by SkyVector. They're SIGMETs, AirMets, and other fun stuff. They're not part of charts. Actually, can I turn off the... Yes, I can. I can turn all that off so it doesn't show up. So now we're only seeing the sectional chart itself. So what's the sectional chart depict? Well, the sectional chart depicts everything. It shows you where airports are, where towns are, cities are, airspace, all sorts of stuff. This is the type of chart you would use if you were flying VFR. IFR would use the low en route charts that we've discussed earlier. So let's go over the things on a sectional chart. Let's first look at airports. Now, airports are depicted in several ways. Usually, airports are depicted as a circle. That circle is either going to be a maroon color or a blue color. It may be filled in. It may not be filled in. It may not be a circle at all. It may be a circle with some cross marks on it. So what does all that mean? Well, we got several different airport examples to show you here. Or it could be an anchor, too. I just saw that one down there. So the first... the most basic symbol for an airport is a circle, as we see up here with Davis Field. Let me zoom in on them. As we see up here with Davis Field, right there, and Hilliard. So, what's the difference between these two? Well, they're both circles. One is filled in. One of them is not filled in. They're both maroon, and they have stars over them. So what does all this mean? And they got information tags, too. Well, what this means, first of all, the circle denotes an airfield. Second of all, if it's filled in, that denotes a hard surface airfield. So Hilliard down here has a soft surface. It's a turf or grass or dirt or what have you. But Folkestone up here has a paved runway, an asphalt, hard surface. It doesn't tell you the surface type. You'd have to go to the airport facility directory for that. But it does tell you that it is a hard surface, most likely asphalt or concrete, maybe cement. What's the star over it mean? Well, the star over it means that it has a rotating beacon. That green and white beacon that you see spinning at night, that's what that means. It has a rotating beacon for that airport. What about this one down here, Jacksonville International? As soon as it loads up. It's always the tile you need the most is the one that loads up last. There. This don't have a circle. This has two solid blue lines and a star in it. Well, that solid blue lines, first we know that's an airport, but that means that this is we can see the runways. This usually means large airfield, basically. Any airfield that has a runway that is over 8,069 feet. Why they put 8,069 and not just 8,000? I don't know. But, yeah, that's what that means. If the runways are over 8,069 feet long, they don't draw it as a circle. They actually draw the runways on the chart. So that denotes big runway. And we see the star there, meaning that airport has a beacon as well. See one here. What about up here at Fernandina Beach? Well, we see it's a maroon color. Now, the color, as you saw, these airports here are blue, but maroon is something else. This one's a maroon. Well, the color denotes whether or not it has a control tower on it. Now, that doesn't mean it has a control tower all the time. I'll show you an example in a second. But here, Craig Municipal and Mayport have control towers. Now, Mayport is Class Delta. We can tell because it has Class Delta airspace. We'll go on the airspace in a little bit. But we can see it has Class Delta airspace around it. Fun fact is Mayport is not a full operation tower. The tower is only open at certain times, and usually it's nodemed open. So Mayport is Class E whenever the tower is not open. So most of the time it's just Class E, Class D when the tower is open. Now up here, maroon color, there is no air traffic control tower. It means it's an uncontrolled airfield. Now, what do these cross marks on it mean? They form a crosshair around the circle? That simply means that there are services at that airfield. Fuel services, specifically, is what they mean when they talk about that. So there is some type of fuel available here. It may be Jet A, maybe 100 low lead, maybe both, maybe MO gas, we don't know. But there is some type of fuel available at this airport. Now, real quick, I want to show you an interesting one. We zoom over here. As soon as I find it. Here's a fun one. Let's look at this one. And I'm going to use this one to lead us into airspaces. This is Lake City Gateway Airfield right here in Lake City, Florida. Now, what do you notice about this airport? Well, it's a blue circle, and it's filled in, meaning it is a hard surface runway, and it has a control tower. But there's no airspace for it. This is actually an interesting airport. This is one of the few airports in the country that has a control tower, but is not Class Delta. The control tower is not operating all the time, though, here. Sometimes it's really just a part-time tower. They're only open some days of the week. So, yeah. This airport is Class Delta with no Class Delta airspace. It's an interesting one. So, airspace. Well, we've looked at some airspace already over here in the Jacksonville area. Let me zoom out a bit. So, what types of airspace are there? Well, this video is about reading charts, not about talking about different types of airspace. So I'm just going to go over how the airspace is depicted. I'm not really going to mention the airspace itself and all the fun things about it. The most basic meaning for an airspace is around an airport, and we see a dotted line around the airport here, 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 and here. What do these blue dotted lines indicate? Well, these indicate Class Delta airspace. And to know its altitude, remember, this is a chart depicting it's a 2D depiction of a 3-dimensional thing. So these charts are showing you airspace, but remember, airspace has a vertical component, and the chart's really only showing you the lateral component. But they list this number here in this little box. That indicates how high the airspace goes up to. Note that inside this box here, Mayport's Class Delta is 25. That doesn't mean 25 feet above the field. That means 2,500. So add 2 zeros to that. So 2,500 is the vertical limit of their airspace. That is including 2,500. If it didn't include 2,500, if it just went up to but did not include 2,500, if it stopped at 2,499, there'd be a minus symbol next to this number. If you see the minus symbol next to the number in the box, that means it goes up to but does not include the listed altitude. Now, does that mean that you could putter along at 2,500 feet through this airspace and not talk to the tower? Legally, yes. Practically, no, because you're close enough. Let's say if your nose cone is going through 2,500, your landing gear is going below 2,500. So, in all honesty, just use best judgment. If I was passing over here at anything lower than 3,000, I would talk to the tower. Just me personally, as a good rule of thumb, round up to the next highest feet, thousands of feet. Now, what about this one here? We see magenta circles encircling Jacksonville International. Well, this is Class Charlie airspace. Real quick, I want to mention the airspace is custom made to the airport and traffic flows that it is serving. So, airspace is always tailored to a particular area. The basic layout is a circle upside down wedding cake, but as you can see, that's not always the case. Here we have essentially 2 boobs. We have Class Delta circle, but it stops short right here where it presses up against this Class Delta circle. So the 2 split right there. They're not perfect 4-mile circles. And the same over here where we have White House and Cecil. And right here you may notice that Class Delta for NAS isn't a perfect circle because if you look closely right here, it stops and goes all the way over to Cecil. So their airspace is actually this little number here, forming a circle all the way around until right there, then goes over, up, over, starts the circle. So that's interesting. Airspace is always custom made. As you can see here, it's a perfect circle all the way to the southern end of the airport where it forms a straight line. Now again, airspace has a vertical component, so how is Class Charlie's vertical component depicted? Class Charlie's vertical component is depicted as a fraction. If you can see here, we have SFC under 40. That means that the airspace in this inner circle here goes from the surface up to 4,000 feet. And the same right here, except it's a 12 under 40. What that means is this outer circle goes from 1,200 feet to 4,000 feet MSL. Again, no minus sign, so it goes up to and includes 4,000 feet. And that's MSL, by the way, not AGL. Over here, the Class Delta, I do believe is AGL altitude, which these airports are at sea level, basically, so that would pretty much mean 2,500 feet MSL anyway. But here it's MSL. Now, there's another type of airspace for an airport, and that is Class Bravo, which we have to go south to see. All right, here we see the big kahuna, Class Bravo airspace. Big boys, Class B. This is the fun one. Class B is busy, busy, busy. So for Class C, like you see here, and Class D down here, and like we saw back up there, what do you need? Well, to fly through the different airspaces, Class D, you need only talk to the air traffic control tower for that airport. So if we wanted to go through Titusville Space Coast Regional Field right over here, it goes up to and includes 1,900 feet. So if we're at 1,500 and we want to go through their airspace, somewhere between 10 and 6 miles out, we need to call that tower and say, hey, here's who we are, where we are, what we want to do. So if we're going to the south from the north, we'll say we are 7 to the south. We'd like to transition your airspace to the north at 1,500 feet. And they will tell us what to do. They will take us through because the only thing we need to enter their airspace is two-way communication with the tower. That's it. So as soon as they call us back with our call sign, they have confirmed they know who we are. We now officially have two-way communication, and we can go through their airspace. So they're going to tell us to go through the airspace anyway. They will most likely say, proceed as requested. Report clear of the airspace. They may give us headings and traffic advisories too. Most of the time they do. In Flight Sim, all they will do, at least with the Flight Sim X default ATC, all they'll say is transition approved, report clear of the airspace. And then you just go through their airspace and report when you're clear of it. What about Class Charlie? Well, Class Charlie, to get through Class Charlie, we have to have two-way radio communication with the controlling agency, which is normally approach control. And we also have to be radar identified. They have to have us on the radar. So they would give us a squawk code and all that fun stuff. They would have us on the radar. That's what we need to go through Class Charlie. Now, Class Bravo, we need to have a clearance. So to go through Class Bravo airspace, we have to have a clearance. The controller has to specifically say, cleared into the Class Bravo. So here we see the Orlando Class Bravo, and we know it's Class Bravo because it's thick blue lines that cover up everything, and it's really, really crazily depicted. And we see the central airport right here. So yeah, this is Orlando's Class Bravo. Another way you can tell it's Class Bravo is this magenta, well, I say magenta, it's more of a maroon color, circle 30 miles around the center airfield of the Class Bravo. That's the Mode C veil. So what that means is if we're going to fly, even if we're not going to be in the Class Bravo, as you can see, the Class Bravo ends right here. But if we're flying around over here, we're inside the Mode C veil. What that means is we have to have a Mode C transponder. So if we're going to fly around at any altitude over here, we have to have a Mode C transponder. Do we have to be talking to ATC and squawking? Technically, no. we just need to have some sort of transponder that transmit mode C, which is altitude encoding. So that transmits our altitude to the controller. They need to know what altitude we're at over here. And the mode C veil, in case you're wondering, goes up to 10,000 feet. The reason it doesn't go up higher is because if you're in the US, if you're flying above 10,000 feet, you have to have a mode C transponder anyway. So, as we can see, Class Bravo airspace is depicted pretty similar to Class Charlie. Again, custom made for the area, and the altitude dimensions are listed the same. Real quick, I want to turn your attention to Orlando Executive here. It's Class Delta. Note its altitude in the box, 16 negative. Negative 16. That means it goes up to, but does not include 16,000. Not 16, 1,600, sorry. 1,600. Now, to avoid all this confusing stuff, we're going to go back up to Jacksonville. And we're going to talk about the information tags for airports. So as you can see, every airport has an information tag close to it. Airspace usually does too. As you can see here, it says Jacksonville Class Charlie. Actually, before we go on the airport tags, one other thing I want to mention is this airspace right here. You see this sort of magenta, maroonish circle that it's soft edge and it fades inward. What that basically means is Class Echo goes down to 700 feet there. So in the airspace around Lake City, Class Echo extends down to 700 feet, whereas normally it's 1,200 feet. So all the way out here is Class Echo at 1,200 feet. Inside these circles, it's 700 feet. So it's Class Golf to 700, then Class Echo. But out here, it's Class Golf to 1,200, then Class Echo. So we'll get to special use airspace in a bit. Let's talk the information tags. Now, these information tags will tell you information about the airport. Don't ignore them because they tell you a lot of things. So real quick, let's look at Davis Field real quick. And we're going to compare Davis with Hilliard. The first line of the info tag is Davis and 3 Juliet 6 in parentheses. Well, that's quite obvious. That's the airport name and its identifier. So this is Davis Field, identifier 3 Juliet 6. This is Hilliard Air Park, identifier 01 Juliet. It just says Hilliard or Davis, doesn't say airfield or air park, but that's the name. So if you're talking on CTAF at these airports, this is the name you use. Davis traffic, or Hilliard traffic, or St. Mary's traffic. You don't say the airport's identifier. Unfortunately, in Flight Sim with default ATC, they typically do use the identifier unless they have the name available. Very rarely they do. Davis Field, Hilliard Field, or Air Park. So what? Yeah, name identifier is the first line. Next line, we see a 68, a L with an asterisk next to it, a 25. And for Hilliard, we see 59, an L, and a 36. What does this mean? The 68 is the airfield elevation above sea level. So 68 feet right here is what this means. This airport is 68 feet above sea level. The L indicates that it has lights. This means that the runway is lit. If you see the asterisk, that indicates that there are lighting limitations, and you need to refer to the AFD for what those limitations are. So here we see 68 L with the asterisk, but down here we see 59 with just the L. What that means is Hilliard is 59 feet above sea level, and the L means that the lights, it has runway lights that are on from sundown to sunup, dusk to dawn. Versus Folkestone, we see the L with the star, the asterisk. That means that the lights, that has lights, but there are limitations. I can tell you off the top of my head that Folkestone's limitations are they are on for a few hours after sundown, then they go off, and there's pilot-controlled lighting. So lighting limitations apply here. Basically means the lights may not be on all night. That 25 is the longest runway in hundreds of feet. So 25 means that Davis Field's longest runway is 2,500 feet. And Davis Field only has one runway. Hilliard Air Park, we see a 36. That means its longest runway is 3,600 feet. And down here at Jacksonville, we have a different one, but we see 100, and that means the longest runway is 10,000 feet long. In the last line, we see 122.9 with a C inside of a solid circle. And the same with Hilliard. And we see it over here on the second line with St. Mary's. What that means is 122.9 CTAF. That means the advisory frequency for Davis Field is 122.9. So that's the frequency you would tune to talk to advisory here. And please refer to it as advisory, not Unicom, because there is a difference between the two. Same with Hilliard, it's on 122.9. St. Mary's is on 122.8. Fernandina Beach is on 122.7. But that C in the circle means it's a CTAF frequency. Now, Fernandina Beach, if you turn your attention to it, has some extra info. We see Fernandina Beach, Foxtrot Hotel Bravo. We see the other lines, the elevation, lighting limitations, 5,300 feet runway, 122.7 CTAF, but this second line is different. We see AWOS-3 118.075. Now what that means is the AWOS is on 118.075. So this has an automated weather observation system. That's the frequency you tune to listen to it. That -3, I'm not sure. I believe that refers to a special AWOS type. I'm not sure. But yeah, for flight sim purposes, that means there's an AWOS there. Now, what about Jackson International and other controlled airfields? We see a little bit depiction. We see the name and identifier. The second line has two frequency infos, though. We see CT-118.3, ATIS 125.85. Well, that means the control tower is on 118.3, and the ATIS is on 125.85. So that tells us all this is listed as if you were flying into the airport. So if we were arriving, if we're arriving into Jacksonville, we care more about the control tower frequency. So ground's not listed here. We would get that from the AFD. So here we see control tower 118.3, ATIS 125.85. Now you may be starting to see why I get mad at VATSIM and IVEO for having a global Unicom frequency of 122.8, especially in the US, because it makes no sense, because all this information is publicly available in the US. It makes more sense in countries outside of the US because they don't make their information as available as the US does, but in the US, you have absolutely no reason to fly in the US in real life or on VATSIM or IVEO and not know what the frequencies are, or not know what the procedures are, or not know where an airway is. Even if your nav data is out of date, the frequencies are public knowledge. Everything is right here. You just need to know how to read it. So that's airfield tags. Real quick, let's talk depiction of surface stuff. So we see these black lines running everywhere, looking like blood vessels. These are roads or highways. So turn your attention to Folkestone here. First of all, let's look at towns. Towns are depicted as towns are always depicted as yellow blobs. Cities are depicted as yellow blobs. What that yellow blob indicates, it shows light patterns. It doesn't really show cities, it shows light patterns. That's what the yellow blob indicates. So if you're flying around here at night, this is where you're going to see the most concentration of lights, is right around here in this blob. And conversely, right up here. You'll see Folkestone, you'll see Hilliard, you'll see St. George, you'll see Callahan. They're all yellow blobs, so we'll be able to see them at night. They'll be pretty identifiable during the day, too. But for the most part, yeah, we'll see them at night. Unfortunately, for those of us flying in Flight Simulator, that doesn't really apply, because if you're using default land class data, it doesn't always show towns. In fact, it gets it wrong 9 times out of 10, sadly. But that's why you might want to invest in some land class. Like, if I had to go through the list of add-ons that are must-haves for all flight simmers, a land class add-on is definitely one of them. Doesn't matter which, no. As long as it's a land class add-on of some type, you should be pretty good. So between Folkestone and St. George, we see this solid line runs from Folkestone through Toledo to St. George. Real quick, I want to mention Toledo now that I brought my attention to it. You see Toledo here with a white speck. We see it again up here, Homeland. Here, Kings Ferry. What does this indicate? Well, this indicates community, basically. A white speck indicates community. There's a collection of buildings here that you can identify from the air. Except there isn't. I never trust these white specks because you could be forgiven for thinking that if you're flying along here, you'll be able to see Toledo. Because it's marked on the chart, right? And sure, we'd be able to see it. Oh, how wrong you would be. You would never find Toledo in real life unless you knew exactly where it was. Because Toledo, although it's marked here, is nothing. It is 2 houses and a shed with a dirt road. That's it. That's what Toledo is. Kings Ferry is a bit bigger. There's quite a few houses at Kings Ferry. Homeland is actually a city. It's just not big enough, and nor does it have the light pollution needed to classify as a yellow blob. But you'd be able to see Homeland, definitely, I can tell you that. Kings Ferry, you might be able to see. Toledo, you ain't going to see to save your life. Anyway, back to the solid line. This solid line indicates a road. Normally, when you see a single solid line like this, that is a 2-lane road. Meaning you may or may not be able to see it. 2-lane roads are notoriously hard to find, especially when they go through the middle of nowhere like this. So there's trees on all sides of this road. Now, off in the desert, where everything's flat and orange and all that, you'd be able to see a road. They're more easily defined. But out here in the wilderness, no. You're not going to find it. It's surrounded by 50-foot trees. It's got no clearing either side the pavement. You're not going to see this road unless you're flying essentially directly over it. What about this one? From the stretch from Folkestone to Callahan, we see this double solid line right here. It's not filled in, it's just a double solid line. That indicates a major road, a 4-lane or more highway. You would see those, definitely. 4-lane highways are easily visible because, for one, they're 4-lane. They usually have a divided median, and they will have a clearing either side of the pavement. So they'll have 2 lanes. They'll have 2 lanes on either side, so 4 total. There's a 50-foot median between them, and at least a 50-foot clearing either side of the pavement, usually more than that. So you'd be able to see that. You're looking at a 300-foot deforested strip running through the world. You'd see it, definitely. Now, you may notice up here, from Folkestone to Kingsland, we see a solid line. It goes double solid, then it goes single solid again. Well, that indicates it's a 2-lane road, but for this stretch right here, it's a 4-lane road. So that is roads, and I tend to avoid trying to use these for anything other than supporting navigation. What I mean by that is following this road, which is US 1 right here, is pretty good. You'd be able to see it, you'd be able to follow it. How would you know you got to Folkestone? Well, if you don't have land class data, you're not going to know you got to Folkestone, but you would be able to see where all these roads come together and split back up again. So what I mean by that is use these bigger roads for primary navigation, the smaller roads for supporting navigation. Alrighty, so that is ground features as far as roads. We also see rivers. You can't really see the St. Mary's River right here because it's got the state border going over it. But this is the St. Mary's River right here. It's a pretty decently wide river, at least for most of the part. Now, the further on you go, it tends to get more narrow, but it's pretty wide for the most part in this area. So, yeah, that's the St. Mary's River. You'll be able to see it. We do see smaller streams depicted, but they're basically impossible to find. The Satilla River is depicted. It's nice and wide. You'd be able to see it. Bridge right here. So we also see these white square, or black squares, sorry, right here. black square here, and it says settlements. That indicates there is a decent concentration of houses there. Again, they're a lot like these white specks. Don't trust them. Now, what about this triangle with the speck under it, or this tower-looking thing right here that has a speck under it with a lightning bolt? Well, what that means, that is an obstacle. Usually a tower, or a water, it could be a radio tower, water tower, it could be anything, but it's an obstacle of some kind. So that's what that indicates. So you know it has a number associated with it. This one right here has 349 with 340 in parentheses. That 349 indicates the height in MSL. And that's the big bold number because that's the one we care about. We care more about what our altimeter reads than we care about converting to feet above ground when it comes to obstacle avoidance. This 340 with the parentheses in it indicates the height above ground for that obstacle. So this obstacle here, I believe that's a cell phone tower, is it's 340 feet above the ground, which makes it 349 feet above sea level. So this does two things. One, this tells us there's an obstacle there. It also tells us the elevation there. We know it's 19 feet because the difference between 349 and 340 is 19. So the elevation right there, that obstacle, 19 feet. Now, what about this one? Obviously, this one must be big and prominent because there's two. Well, that indicates a group of obstacles. That doesn't indicate two specifically. That indicates a group which could be two or more. So I know for a fact there's actually two towers here. There's not more than that. I think there may be a smaller one there, but there's two towers here. So it's a group of obstacles, and it goes up to 1510 MSL. And if you look at the parentheses, it's a 1,500 one-foot tower. These towers are humongous. If you go here on Google Earth and find them, they are huge. They're gigantic. I've driven by on this road plenty of times, and I see them when I do. They're humongous. Normally with these small obstacles like this one, you can't find them from the air because they're really, really hard to see unless they're in a group close together. Something this big, you're going to find it. You can see this obstacle here. So what's some other things we see? Well, we see airways. Here's the Tango 204 airway, and you can switch to the en route chart, and you can see it right there. Tango 204, back to the sectional, Tango 204. We also see VORs. So VORs are depicted, and they'll show a symbol here. And the symbol's different depending on the type of VOR station. This is a VORTAC right here, which means it's a VOR TACing, which is TACing's a military navigation thing that they honestly don't use that much anymore. But yeah, there's a VOR right there. We see a compass rose around it, indicating, and that's the radials. We see an arrow extending from the station itself up to north. Now that indicates the magnetic north. VORs are relative to magnetic north. These longitude-latitude lines here that you see, these black lines with the hash marks on it, those are relative to true north because they're longitude and latitude, true north. But VORs are magnetic north, so you can kind of see the variation there and the difference between the two. Now they have an information tag on them that tells you the frequencies. So here we see Brunswick VOR 109.8, channel 35, identifier Sierra Sierra India, Morse code identifier, ... Here we see a box underneath that says Macon. That indicates the flight service station associated with that VOR. If you see these frequencies here above it, these frequencies indicate that this VOR has voice capability in a way. It can you can transmit to the flight service station because there's an RCO outlet at this VOR. So if we're flying over here near St. Andrews Sound and we want to talk to flight service, we would tune one of these frequencies, and the flight service station we'll talk to is Macon. That's what that box indicates. That's the flight service station associated with it. So if we tune 122.1, and we'll say Macon Radio, Cessna 13312, transmitting Brunswick VOR. And they'll come back to us because they have voice capability here. These frequencies here are the ones you would tune. R after the frequency here, you see 122.1R. That indicates you will receive on this one. So you would transmit on any one of these three frequencies, 121.5, 122.2, and 255.4. Transmit on any one of them. Don't transmit on 121.5 because that's guard. Transmit on 122.2 because your radio can receive it. 255.4, I don't think civilian radios can tune. But you need to tune your other radio to 122.1 because that's the frequency that you're going to hear them on. They won't transmit on 122.2 even though you do. They'll transmit on 122.1. Unfortunately, Flight Service Station is not really replicated in Flight Simulator, so that doesn't really mean much to us. It's kind of replicated in that some airports you can get an IFR clearance from Flight Service and Flight Sim. St. Mary's, I believe, is that. So if you go to St. Mary's in Flight Sim X and want an IFR clearance, you actually do talk to the Flight Service Station from here, which is interesting. But that's the only time you ever use Flight Service Station in Flight Sim X, which is sad because Flight Service is very, very helpful. Now, one thing I want to mention about the VORs before we move on is something a lot of people don't really think about. These compass rose on the VORs can serve as a ruler. Because if you look, if I plan from the VOR and go over here on the 090 radial, 10 miles. VOR compass rose are drawn in 10-mile circles around the VOR, always. So you can kind of use these to gauge the distance at a glance. So if you wanted to know the distance between Brunswick VOR and Folkestone, we'll just look about how many VOR compass roses could you put between this VOR and Folkestone. You could put roughly 2.5 maybe. So this one more, and then half of another. So that's about 25 miles. And sure enough, if we do a real quick measurement, 34. Okay, so you could fit 3. I was guessing 25. I guess you could probably fit 3. I don't know. It doesn't really look like it, though, does it? But yeah, these compass rows are drawn as a 10-mile circle all the time. So you can use that to gauge distance. Okay, now that we've covered airports and ground features, real quick, let's mention airspace again. We're going to talk about special use airspace now. Special use airspace is airspace that has special things about it. Now, there's several different types. There is prohibited, restricted, military operation, warning area, alert area, controlled firing area. Those are the 6 main ones. There's also special VFR, and there's another one that I can't quite remember the name of, but I like to call it special military airspace. And special VFR is depicted like this. We see these blue lines here that are sort of zigzagging back and forth, almost like a zipper mark. This is special VFR. So if we're flying VFR through this little corridor here, special rules apply. And it says South Florida Low Control Area. Gray Reef Natural Sanctuary right there. Oh, real quick. Nature reserves such as swamp parks and other things like that, any federal forest park, anything like that, you'll see them here. Here's Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge. You'll see it has a solid line with specks going on the inside of it. And that indicates special airspace that they request you be higher than 3,000 feet MSL when flying over it. The reason is this is a wildlife refuge. People come here to camp and go on vacation, and you don't want to disturb the animals in here. Truth be told, you don't want to fly over the Okefenokee Swamp ever, but legally you can. It's just they want you to be above 3,000 feet when you do. Due to noise pollution, they don't want you to disturb the people and animals down here. Now, why would you not want to go over the Okefenokee Swamp? Well, if you look, they have this marshland marking. This little, what looks like plants and dashes everywhere. That's marshland. And I can tell you, because I live in this area, the Okefenokee Swamp is a place you do not want to fly over, because this is a couple thousand square acres worth of nothing. There is fuck all out there. There is trees, marshland, and the occasional grassland. That's it. And there's no island. There's nothing to navigate with out here. You have no fixed point of reference that you can see. You're not going to see that pond there until you get directly over it. You're not going to see the encampments, the ranger stations, or anything like that. The only thing you have to navigate with out here is VOR. And if you lose your engine over this, you're going in the swamp. Good luck. Because there's lots of animals in here that aren't very nice. Big alligators, panthers, bears, there's all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I don't recommend flying over swamps because there's nothing to navigate by. You're not going to see the islands. For one, the islands in this swamp move. And second of all, they're small. You're not going to find them. We saw that depiction back over here too. So there is a national sanctuary right there over Gray's Reef that they don't want you flying over unless you're above 3,000. So this is how SVFR airspace is depicted, or sort of special VFR restriction airspace. SVFR is a different thing. But yeah, that's how it's depicted, and that means there are special rules for VFR traffic inside that airspace. Typically that means they want you to have the terminal area chart as well as any other chart. Out here, I'm not really sure why they had this, but you can find this in New York along Manhattan Island and along the rivers. Yeah, you'll find this where they want you to have certain charts and be familiar with certain procedures. So that's a special VFR airspace. Over here we have warning areas. We see warning areas are depicted as blue lines with hashes going towards the airspace. If you can see this blue line here, the hashes point inside to the airspace. So what this indicates is a warning area. What is a warning area? A warning area is restricted airspace that they cannot legally make restricted because it's over international waters. They would make these restricted if they could legally get away with it, but they can't make them restricted because they're over international waters. So technically speaking, it is legal for you to fly in these airspace right here, in the warning area. They can't stop you, but it could be hazardous to your health to fly in the warning areas, because what are they doing here? Well, they're practicing, they're making abrupt maneuvers at high speed, they're at low altitude, they're at high altitude sometimes. They're often shooting at each other, warning areas, laser, target practice, all that fun stuff. So yeah, it's advantageous if you avoid this airspace. Warning areas, and they're depicted as Whiskey 137 Lima right here, Whiskey 138 Lima, 137 Delta. They have different things, and real quick I'm going to show you, if you zoom out on the chart, this don't work if you have world selected, but I have just the sectional depicted. You can see it is actually a scan of the chart itself, not just what it indicates. So if you look down here, we zoom in on that section, we'll see the airspace information. So I said that airspace was Whiskey 137 Alpha, I believe. Let's find it on here. Whiskey 137 Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo Foxtrot Lima. So this line here indicates information about that airspace. It indicates its vertical component, its hours of operation, and the controlling agency. So this is where you go to find out anything about special use airspace, because there are sometimes you would want to use this. So Whiskey 137 Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo Foxtrot and Lima is from the surface to unlimited. This always applies from the surface unless otherwise noted. So here you see R3008 Alpha is to 10,000, so that goes from the surface to 10,000 feet. Versus here, R3008 Bravo is 100 to 10,000. So back to our example of Whiskey 137, it's surface to unlimited, so it goes up essentially the space. It's continuous, meaning it's operating all the time. You never want to fly here, ever. And the controlling agency is Jacksonville Center. So if you wanted to safely fly through this airspace, this is who you need to talk to, Jacksonville Center. They're the controlling agency. So what other types of airspace is there? Well, warning we just covered. There's also prohibited right here, and we see P50 is prohibited airspace. Prohibited airspace is depicted as a blue line with hash marks pointing into the airspace. Exactly like warning areas, and that's one thing I'm saying. Warning areas are essentially restricted airspace that they cannot legally make restricted. They would make warning areas restricted if they could legally get away with it. But they can't, so they don't. Here, they can legally get away with it. P50. This is prohibited airspace, and again, you can go down to the airspace info in the bottom of the chart to find out about it. I can tell you from memory that P50 goes from the surface to, but not including 3,000 feet, and is controlled, it's active all the time, and is controlled by, I believe, Jacksonville Approach is the controlling agency. So prohibited airspace is rare, and what prohibited airspace means is they don't want you flying here ever. It's sensitive area. They don't want you flying there. There is a number of reasons they might not want you there. Usually it's for national security to protect certain buildings, like Washington, D.C.'s, the Capitol Building, the White House, or Camp David. Here they have it over Kings Bay Naval Base. Now, Kings Bay Naval Base is one of only 2 naval bases on the East Coast for submarines. It's one of the primary one, anyway. Norfolk's the other one, I believe, but Kings Bay here is the primary naval base for submarines on the East Coast for the South. So they got submarines there, they got nukes there, they got sensitive things there. They don't want you flying there for national security reasons. P50, don't go there. Prohibited airspace is prohibited, cannot fly there at any time. Don't ask. And the reason I say don't ask, we'll get into in just a second when we talk about restricted airspace, which we can see down here. R2903 Alpha, and here's R2903, I believe, Bravo, and Charlie and Delta. So this airspace right here is restricted. And this one protects Camp Blanding and their operations, Army base right here. Notice Camp Blanding has an airport too. It's a special depiction though. We see a circle with another circle inside of it. I'm not really sure if that means anything special, but I can tell you Camp Blanding is an Army airfield, which normally means they have a maybe a paved runway that's only 500 feet long, because the Army Air Corps is mostly just helicopters. They don't really have too many fixed wings, so yeah, that's a thing. So their airports are more oriented towards helicopters. But they do have a runway. It just happens to be 700 feet long. Not really long enough for any kind of aircraft. And one other thing I forgot to mention about airports, sometimes you may see the circle with the R in it. That means it's a restricted private airfield, basically. Here we see PVT in a parentheses. That means it's private airport. This is the State Prison Airfield right here. We also see Spencer's, Williams are private. Two others actually. God, I forgot to mention some stuff. We see a circle with an X going through it. That means there is an airfield here that you can see. It's just abandoned. So you don't want to land here. You don't want to use this airport. It's abandoned. They probably use it as a parking lot now. And up here we see an anchor. That means there is a seaplane base there. So here's private field, Doctors Lake, seaplane base there. Alrighty, so back to airspace. We see restricted is depicted as a blue line with hash marks pointing inside the airspace. Restricted basically means you cannot fly there when the airspace is active unless you get permission from the controlling agency. So what that means is if R2903 Alpha is not active, we would have to look down at the airspace information section again, but we could find out the active time. So if it's not active, we can fly here. It essentially goes away. If it is active, then we can't fly there. But that other part where we could talk the controlling agency, so the controlling agency most likely here is Jack's Center. So if we talk to the controlling agency, again, most likely Jack's Center, we could get permission to go through that airspace. For instance, it could be active during the weekdays, but maybe the Army doesn't have anything going on. The controlling agency would know that, so they would say, we would call them and say, hey, is there anything going on? Could we go through R293 Alpha? And they'll check and they'll say, yeah, you can go through it. There's nothing going on today. And just like that, the restricted airspace essentially went away because we can go through it because we talked to the controlling agency first and we got permission. So yeah, restricted airspace, you cannot fly there unless you have permission or if the airspace is not hot. So next we have military operation areas, and they're depicted as maroon lines with hash marks pointing in towards the airspace, as we can see here. Military operation areas refer to areas of non-hazardous military operations. By the way, if you're wondering what goes on in restricted airspace, normally that's where target ranges are or the military is doing practice bombing runs. If you look down here, it's just north of Orlando, R2910 Alpha. If you look right here, this is the Pine Castle bombing range right here. So inside this airspace, you're going to see aircraft flying pretty much low, high speed, and they're making bomb runs. And Pine Castle is one of the only bombing ranges on the southeast coast of the U.S. that is approved for live fire training. So yeah, they're using live fire ordnance here. So you definitely don't want to be flying in there when it's active. For military operations areas, they basically say non-hazardous operations. What that means is they're not shooting at anybody or anything here. So what's happening here is you're going to often find military aircraft going high speed, low altitude, or they may be higher. They could be any altitude, really. And they're making abrupt maneuvers. They're hauling ass. You may not see them ever. So it's dangerous-ish to fly in MOAs. Now, real quick, I want to talk. Some people like to avoid MOAs like the plague. You talk to some pilots, they'll say, no, don't fly in an MOA ever. It's too dangerous. But I want to show you something. Look how big this MOA is. This is the Live Oak MOA. Look how big this one is. This one is the Moody MOA. It goes all over the place. Over here we have the Coastal MOA. I mean, they're everywhere and they're huge. Do you honestly think you could learn to fly anywhere here and not go into the MOA? I mean, look at the number of airports. We got Valdosta. It's a controlled airport. Thomasville is just outside. Here we see Multier. Alma is over here somewhere. Well, Alma's actually outside of it. Tifton, Bern County, Cook County, Homerville, all these airports that you could perfectly legally fly to inside the MOA. Now, technically speaking, the MOA does not include the airspace around them because there's always an exclusion around an airport for at least 5 miles. You could say that where you see this Class Echo drop to 700 feet depiction, that's the protected area too. So you won't see the A-10s out of Moody doing crazy stuff close to the airport. They're not that stupid. But you will see them all over the place everywhere else. Now, I want to point out it's no more or less dangerous to fly in an MOA than it is anywhere else. As long as you're smart about it. Keep your head on a swivel, if it would help at all, because you're most likely not going to see the fighters. And also, talk to the controlling agency. Get flight following if you're going to go through an MOA, because the ATC controlling agency is going to know where the military activity is at that day, because the military has better charts than we do. They divide MOAs up into several areas. So if we wanted to make a flight through the south section of the Moody MOA, and we're one of those pilots that just avoids MOAs like the plague, and we don't want to go through it, so we go around it, add 100 miles to our trip, burn 100 miles more fuel, and take 100 miles longer to get there. Which would be kind of sad if all the military air traffic that day was on the northern side of the MOA. So yeah, go through the MOAs if you want, talk to the controlling agency if you do, because the controlling agency, for one, can separate you, 2, they'll know where the traffic's at. So if they will know all the traffic's on the northern section of the MOA today. So they could take you through the south section just fine. They may give you restrictions if you go through it. It's like if you request to go through the MOA, they'll be like, yeah, just maintain at or above 3,000. And that is them telling you if you stay at or above 3,000, you'll be clear of the crazy maniacs flying fighters a feet off the ground. So that's MOAs. So we've gone over warning, we've gone over prohibited, restricted, and MOAs. Let's go over alert areas, which I cannot find any, to be honest. I don't think there are any around here. There used to be. Alert areas are just areas where they want you to keep extra alert. In all honesty, there should be one right here because this is the practice area. There are planes flying left and right in this section of airspace between Craig and St. Augustine right here. So there should be one right there, but there's not. So yeah, alert areas are just areas where they want you to stay alert, which you should be alert all the time, but they want you to heighten awareness in alert areas because a high density of air traffic or training or whatnot, planes doing maneuvers, not limited to the military. They're talking civilian aircraft there. I don't see any on this chart anymore. There may be a few. But yeah, basically alert areas, they just want you to keep your head on a swivel, stay alert. Okay, so the other restricted air or special use airspace is one I called special military airspace, which I'm not sure if it's official or not, but we actually see it depicted here. I don't know how rare these are. This is relatively new. If we look here, we see a black line with hash marks pointed at an angle pointing inside the airspace, and it extends from Whiskey 137 across Florida all the way over to Whiskey 136. And we see it has altitudes associated with it too. It's from 500 to 5,000 here, 3,000 to 5,000 here, 3,000 to 6,000 here. We see it pretty much parallels IR 32 and IR 33. More on those in a minute. This is what I like to call special military airspace, meaning there is some type of military traffic going on here. And you can see the notation here as well. Special military activity, contact Gainesville Radio 122.2 for active status. So there's something happening here. What I think this is to let you know that high-speed military traffic may be transitioning from one warning area to the other along here, is what I think that means. I'm pretty sure that's what that indicates. I'm not really sure what that is because this is kind of new to me. When I was learning to fly, this was not a thing, but now I see it is. So, in fact, I got a chart right here, an older chart. This chart is a 2012 chart. I want to see if it's on it. Yeah, okay. So it was as late as 2012 too, so it is on there. But yeah, when I was learning to fly, this was not a thing. So I'm guessing this is relatively new. But yes, 122, and there's no, you can't find this in the airspace section of the chart because they have it here. It's going to be active off and on. Talk to Gainesville Radio if you want to know if it's active or not. They're on 122.2. And the last bit of airspace is controlled firing areas. So, what's a controlled firing area? Be sitting down when I read this definition to you. A controlled firing area is an area where they're going to be shooting live fire weapons up into the air, and they're not going to tell you when or where they're doing it. So yeah, let that simmer for a minute. Firing live ordnance up into the air, not telling us when or where they're doing it. Isn't that nice? So let's say, for example, there was one here. Now, sometimes they do. You can often find where controlled firing areas are in the AFD, or they may be notamed, but sometimes you can find them. They're just not depicted on the charts. So let's say there was one right here. There's not. There's nothing but wilderness here. But let's say there was one right here where my crosshair is, middle of the chart. What this means is they're going to be shooting there at whatever time, but the reason they're not telling us when or where is because they don't need to. They're going to have somebody, either an AOX plane or ground-based radar or something, watching this airspace. And whenever a civilian aircraft or non-participating aircraft comes close, they will halt the operation. So whatever they're doing, whatever they're shooting, whenever we or other civilian aircraft ventures too close to their watch area, they're going to shut it all down. They pull a Madagascar and shut everything off. And they will sit there doing nothing but twiddling their thumbs, just waiting on us to fuck off, basically. So if we come here and start doing practice, they're going to be pretty pissed, but there really ain't nothing they can do about it. So if we're just transitioning the area, we ain't going to know because they don't need to tell us. They'll stop the operation when we come nearby and resume it when we leave. How convenient. Personally, I'd still like to know that they were shooting there. So yeah, that's a controlled firing area. And I believe that covers all of the special use airspace. But let's move on to routes. So obviously we see airways depicted. Now if we're flying VFR, and we'll see this in the VFR Flight Planning video in this series, that we tend to go from waypoint to waypoint following a series of fixed points on the ground. But we can also use airways as VFR. Airways are not for IFR flight only, unless they're jet airways. We can use the airways here. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't show the waypoints on them, so we're a bit limited on them. But we can fly to and from the VORs via an airway, and we can tell if we know what the difference between a Tango and a Victor airway is, whether or not it is an RNAV. Because you see they have Tango 204 and Tango 210 and Victor 198 all depicted with the same marking. If you look at low en route charts, they're depicted differently because they're two different types of airways. But they're prefixed with the T or the V, so if we knew what that meant, we could tell that this is an RNAV airway, this is an RNAV airway, this is a Victor airway. So yeah, you can use airways if you are flying VFR. In fact, I would encourage it. I would encourage you also be smart about it, because if you look, Tango 204 goes directly over the swamp. So flying VFR, I'd say be smart and use the airways when and where you can if it's advantageous, but don't use it if it's going to hurt you. So one last thing I want to talk about. We've covered pretty much everything we need to know to use these charts effectively for our flight sim. Except one other thing. Going back to the airspace real quick, I mentioned that I'm a little teed off at VATSIM and IVAO because they force us to use a global CTAF. But there's really, in the US, they don't need to because all this information is public. I don't know why they don't just let us use the published CTAF frequencies. Because obviously the public knowledge in the US, they're all right here. They're on the charts, they're on the AFDs, they're on approach plates, they're on everything. There's absolutely no reason for you not to know this stuff. What about other airspace? Let's say we're flying on VATSIM or IVAO one day, and by some miracle, all three positions of Jacksonville approach is manned, and they're operating on each frequency. So if we're flying in from the south, say we took off from Flagler County here, and we're flying up to St. Mary's, and we'll just say that's our route of flight. Or actually, let's say this is our route of flight. So we're going to go through the class Charlie. Even if we're above the 4,000, we're going to be descending at some point along this leg. So we're most likely going to go through the class Charlie here. And again, to go through the class Charlie, we need to be talking to approach control. So if we're coming in from the south, and we want to get flight following with approach control, how do we know who to contact? Well, if you look right here, it actually tells us. Contact Jacksonville approach within 20 nautical miles on 118.0, 351.8 above 5,000, or 124.9, 308.4, 5,000 and below. So that's giving us two frequencies. So some point prior to crossing 20 nautical miles from Jax, and these are relative to the primary airport for the approach control, which for Jacksonville, which normally if it says it's Jacksonville approach, that's the airport they're talking about here. So if you go back down here to Orlando, it'll say contact Orlando approach. Look for Orlando's primary airfield, which will most likely be Orlando International. And the same over here with Daytona. Daytona Beach International is the primary. So, and you can do this if you have, say, a compass, one of the navigation, not a compass that tells you the direction, but a compass for drawing that draws circles. If you have one of those, if you can fix it so that you show 10 nautical miles or 50 nautical miles, draw a 50 nautical mile circle around the the primary airport. That's approach controlling airspace. They want you to contact them. If you're going to talk to them and go through this airspace, they want you to call them no later than 20 miles. That's what that 20 nautical mile thing. They don't want you to wait until 20 nautical miles to talk to them. They want you sometime prior to 20 nautical miles. So let's say we were coming through here, or actually better yet, because I have a plan for this. Let's say, let's just add Kilo Alpha Yankee Sierra, Kilo Charlie Romeo Golf. Let's say this was our flight plan. So we're going to land at Craig. Damn it, go away. And we have to get through the class Charlie to get to Craig, or we have to go way out of our way to get around it. So, how do we know who to contact? Well, right here. Contact Jacksonville Approach within 20 nautical miles, 127.0, 322.4. Two frequencies. We only care about the one our radio can tune. 322.4, only the military radios can tune. 127.0 is what our radio can tune. That's the frequency we'd use. And down here it gets a bit bigger where they say 118.0 above 5,000 and 124.9 5,000 and below. So it's altitude dependent here who you talk to. But over here and over here it's not. They just want you any altitude within 20 miles. So what we would do is some point prior to 20 nautical miles, we will call them and say, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I want to do. So let's say we were over Folkestone, and we wanted to contact Jacksonville Approach to get through the class Charlie to land at Craig. Funny enough, this is what that actually sounds like.
212.
Jack 13312, Jack, go ahead.
Jackson Approach, Skyhawk 13312 is a student pilot 3 miles south of Folkestone 3 Juliet 6 at 5,500. Like to transition your airspace landing Craig. We have information uniform.
Squawk 0451, maintain VFR.
0451 and maintain VFR 312.
Chilling 2472, turn right heading 140.
So if you listen to that, that was me. That was a live ATC recording that I got from liveatc.net way back when I was a student pilot. That was on my long cross-country flight. I said I was just south of Folkestone, 3 Juliet 6 at 5,500. So we find Folkestone right there. I was just south of Folkestone, 3 Juliet 6. Did I need to have the airport identifier? Technically, no. They really would know where Folkestone's at, but I put it there just in case. So I'm just south, meaning I'm quite literally just south. I'm roughly a mile south of Folkestone, 3 Juliet 6 at 5,500. I would like to transition their airspace, landing Craig. We have information uniform. What that meant is I want to go through the class Charlie airspace. I'm landing at Craig, so I'm not just going through the class Charlie airspace from one side to the other. I'm landing at an airport within their coverage, so I'm saying I'm landing Craig is where I want to go. And I have information uniform, which meant I had the information uniform from Craig, because I was close enough I could pick up Craig Zetas. So that tells them everything, and they go on to tell me a squawk code and all that, and they get me through the class Charlie. I land at Craig, everything's hunky-dory. So how did I know who to contact? Well, right here it tells me, but we see there's a box here and a box here. How do we know the difference? I'm going to bring up PowerPoint real quick. So I have drawn a circle depicting the roughly the coverage area of Jacksonville Approach. It's not quite to scale, but let's say this was a 50-mile circle around Jacksonville. So this is the approach controls airspace. How do we know who to contact? Well, we can actually look at the AFD. If we bring up the info page for the primary airport for approach control, Jacksonville International, and I love SkyVector for this because they have this cutout of the AFD, and if you click on it, it brings you right to it. So we can look at their control ATC info, approach control 118.0, 091 to 180 above 5,000. So if we go into PowerPoint and we draw a line starting from the primary airport, 091, so right, we'll say there, and let me make that line a bit bigger. Actually, let's make it red, and let's increase the weight on it so we can see it. And let's put another one, and they said down to 180, right there. So again, red, and make it 3-part. What was the other one? 119.0 from 270 to 090. So if we draw another one, extending from the airport to 270, roughly that way, right there, and make it big enough that we can actually see it. 127.0 from 270 to 090, we have that from here to here. 123.8 for 181 and 269. We have, by default, we've already drawn that one as well. 124.9 from 091 to 180, 5,000 and below. And 121.3 for above 6,000. So we've actually we have drawn out the sectors for Jacksonville approach. So we know if we're coming through anywhere here, this is the frequency. We use this box for this section, this box for this section. Depends on our altitude, also depends on the section. So from here, if we're above 5,000, they want us on 118.0. Below 5,000, 124.9. Over here, they want us on 123.8 regardless of altitude. Up here, 127.0 regardless of altitude. And to be perfectly honest, if you inadvertently tune the wrong frequency, like if I'm here and I inadvertently tune 124.9, I'll say Jacksonville approach, and I'm transmitting on 124.9. The controller knows what frequency he's monitoring. So if he figures out that I'm over here, one of two things will happen. One, he may tell me to go ahead and contact the appropriate frequency. He'll say something like, if I'm Cessna 13312 and I'm getting flight following over here, but I'm transmitting on 124.9, that controller over there is going to say Cessna 13312, contact Jacksonville approach 123.8. So just a quick frequency change is all it is. They're going to tell you if you're on the wrong frequency. Tuning the wrong frequency happens from time to time. It happens to everybody, so it's just one of those things. No one gives you any grief. So yeah, we have quite literally just drawn out the approach sectors. We can get that from the AFD, but we can also sort of guess it just by looking at a chart. Whichever one of these whichever one of these boxes your course takes you closer to is the one you're going to use. So yeah, we have figured out how to know which frequency to use. So yeah, for those of you wondering, how do I know what frequency to use if I'm in an unfamiliar area, the chart tells you. And remember, on the en route charts, they'll tell you the center controlling frequencies. That's a bit weird. They tell you center on the en route charts, but not approach control. And for sectionals, they tell you approach control, but not center. So if you're way up here and you wanted to know who to talk to, what I would do is just find the closest airfield, look at it in the AFD. Let's say if I'm up here, Waycross, if we look at Waycross in the AFD, and again, you can do this on SkyVector or the digital AFD. I've gone over how to find the digital AFD before. If not, I definitely will at some point in this tutorial, believe when I talk about special VFR stuff. Again, just click right here, and it takes you to the AFD page. This is skyvector.com. Very useful website. So if we're flying somewhere near Waycross, we need to call center. We don't know what frequency because it's not listed. We're outside of approach control's airspace. Who do we know to talk to? Find the closest airfield, find its information page, and see if it tells you. Communications, CTAF Unicom 122.8, RCO 122.1, JAX Center Approach Departure Control. What that means is Jacksonville Center is providing approach and departure control for this airport. They're on 127.575. So if we're within 3 miles of Waycross, it's a pretty safe bet that if we tune 127.575, we would be talking to the appropriate center controller. So that's very useful if we're departing here and we want to get VFR flight following, or if we're planning an IFR flight out of here, that's how we know who to talk to. because we need to know this to fill in our nav log beforehand. And real quick, I mentioned earlier the difference between CTAF and Unicom. A lot of people in flight sim, it's a common misconception to refer to advisory as Unicom. I hear it all the time, especially on VATSIM and IVAO. Unicom and advisory are two separate frequencies. Although they often share a frequency, they are two separate things. Advisory is just that. That's where you're giving your traffic advisories. Who I am, where I am, what I want to do. And that's who you're listening to for other airplanes giving advisories. Unicom is more for talking to services like FBOs at the airport. So if there is an FBO here at Waycross, if I wanted to talk to them, I'd tune the Unicom frequency, which just so happens to be the same as the CTAF frequency here. And often enough, that's the case. But it's not always. Sometimes it will be different. So yeah, we've gone over VFR sectional charts. I guess we can go ahead and touch on the AFD. So again, you can see you can get the AFD just by, let's use St. Mary's as an example, bringing up the airport information page in SkyVector, and you can see the airport information page in SkyVector essentially is the AFD. It tells you all the same information, a little bit of extra information too, because they got the approaches, they got remarks and things like that. They also have the fuel prices for the FBOs there, and they have quick links to take you back to the charts, either the VFR or the en routes. They have a satellite picture. Sometimes, though not always. Let's see if they have it for Waycross. No, they don't. They'll have an airport image here, so if you're flying and you take a picture of the airport from the air, you can upload it here, and they'll have an image of the airport if someone has. So all this information here on SkyVector is the same as the AFD. It's in a slightly harder to read format, slightly easier depending on the person. I find it a little harder to read, but they also have this. If you hover your mouse over here, it'll bring up the cutout of the AFD. If you click on it, it'll take you directly to the AFD information page. So real quick, I'm going to bring up the digital AFD. If you want to know how to get it, digital AFD. First link, FAA.gov digital AFD. Just Google digital AFD, first link. Then you click Airport Facility Directory Search. Now you have two options. You can either type in the identifier for your airport or navigate if you know it. You could sort by state or sort by volume. So AFDs are divided up into volumes. This is their coverage area. AFDs will list information about everything in this volume area. Let's go to the southeast because that's where we've been focusing. So AFDs have the airport information pages for one. So every airport will have a information page, and on that information page they will list a lot of useful stuff. The name of the airport and the identifier again, the location relative to the city that it's under. See, it's sorted by city here. So this is in St. Mary's. So we would go to the St. Mary's city section and we'd find the airport. So this airport is 2 miles north of St. Mary's. It's UTC difference from time. So right now it's -4 UTC because we're in daylight hours, daylight savings time, but during standard time it's -5 UTC. There's its longitude and latitude, its elevation. Not sure what the B means, not sure what the S2 means. Fuel available, they have 100 low lead and Jet A1+. NOTAM files Macon, that means the facility handling NOTAMs for this airport is Macon. Then we have runway information. Runway 4-22 is 5021, it says H5021 by 100 ASPH. Means hard surface, 5021 feet by 100 feet, asphalt. S20 is the weight bearing for that runway. Means the load bearing for the runway is S20. Don't ask me what that means because I don't know. For flight simming, you can basically ignore that. MIRL means there are medium intensity runway lights. That's the edge lights. And then these list obstacles here. Displaced threshold, 758 feet. Reason, trees. And that means there's a displaced threshold on the runway, as indicated by the squiggly fishtail mark right here. And the same for the other runway. If they list displaced threshold, they'll say the feet of the displaced threshold from the start of the runway, and the reason for the displaced threshold, trees. Airport remarks, attended 1300 to 2130 Zulu, so from 1 in the morning Zulu time to 2130 Zulu time. 100 low lead self-service fuel with credit card, meaning there is self-service fuel available, so even if we go here and the FBO is closed, we can purchase fuel and just handle it ourselves. Two-way radio communication be utilized with Jacksonville Approach 127.0 controlling agencies when flying in vicinity of St. Mary's Airport due to prohibited airspace P50 1/2 to 2.5 miles northeast of airport. What that means is they recommend you talk to Jacksonville Approach on 127.0 when you're flying around this airfield. They recommend it. That doesn't mean it's required. They just recommend you do it. That way they know who you are. And if they know if you accidentally blunder into P50, they'll be able to tell if it was an accident. If you're not talking to them and you blunder into P50, they're going to take notice of that, and they're probably going to have some F-15s intercept you. But if you're talking to them, they'll make you aware that you're getting too close to P50. Would you please fly somewhere else? For one, they may tell you or ask you, is there a particular reason why you just went into P50? So yeah, it's very, very useful. And I just want to mention, hats off to the air traffic control. There is absolutely no reason, although we always talk in VFR flying about, if you do this, you don't have to talk to air traffic control, or do this if you don't want to talk to air traffic control. For the love of God, talk to air traffic control. Because the amount of services and useful stuff they provide, there's just no end to it. They can really bail you out of a bad situation and help you out. So there's absolutely no reason you shouldn't talk to air traffic control. What other stuff we got? Runway 422, LGTG does not indicate displaced threshold. Okay, what that means, I'm guessing, is the lights don't indicate a displaced threshold. So runway lights are regulated. Displaced threshold lights are normally red for the direction of the displaced threshold. What that tells us is that they're not. So the displaced threshold is not indicated by the runway lights here. Medium intensity runway lights 422, preset low intensity to increment intensities, activate CTAF. What that means is if we were to look back at the chart, in fact, I'll bring SkyVector up real quick. If that means if we were to look back at the chart, I'm pretty sure I'm about to find what I think I'm about to find and look at St. Mary's. Sure enough, we see the L with the star on their information tag, 23 star L. And what did that L with the star mean? There was lights at the airfield, but there were lighting limitations. Refer to the AFD. We're referring to the AFD. Here's their lighting limitations. Medium intensity runway lights on 422 and 1331, but they're preset to low intensity. That means when the airport lights come on at sunset, they don't go straight to medium. They're going to be on low. And you can up them to medium using the pilot-controlled lighting on the CTAF frequency. Unfortunately, pilot-controlled lighting is something that's not normally simulated by Flight Sim. It is possible to have pilot-controlled lighting, just not the same way it is in real life. But, that's that. Airport manager phone number, if you have to call the airport manager. This is more applicable to real life. Please don't do this for flight simming. Because if you're flying here real life and it's an unfamiliar airfield, you want to know anything about this airport, you would call the airport manager to ask for, what's the hours of operation for the FBO, any special procedures I need to know about, and they'll tell you. They'll be more than happy to tell you. Then you got the radio communications, radio aids to navigation, NOTAM file, SSI, Brunswick VORTAC. That's basically listing the closest VOR is Brunswick VORTAC 109.8. The reason it say that is because there's a nearby radio aid to navigation. If you look at the chart, it's right up there. It's within 20 miles, essentially. 109.8 SSI, channel 35. There's its position. It's 202 degrees, 18.7 nautical miles to field. That's relative from the VOR. That's basically telling you the VOR, or the airport, is on the 202 radial, 18.7 miles from the Brunswick VOR, is basically what that's saying. And note they have a nice little airport sketch for us. And this is pretty useful too because you can see the overall layout of the airport. Not all airports have this. We can see Rome has one. Back to the digital AFD. We've searched by volume. Here's all the fun stuff. You can go straight to the information page by clicking this link here. If we open it in a new tab, I'm done with this tab. So this is Hilliard Air Park. I went straight to the information page by clicking on SE. Oh, that's not the information page. Sorry. This is the information page. So Hilliard Air Park, go straight to its information page by in the column Airport Nav-Aid Listing. Clicking that takes you right to that airport's information page. As you can see, this one don't have a diagram, a little sketch. It just has the information about the airport. So 01 Juliet, 59 feet, NOTAM file Gainesville. There's the runway. That has displaced threshold. It's a turf runway. Unattended, active high-intensity runway lights, airport manager's phone number, all that fun stuff. This other one I clicked on, that's a 15.12 megabyte download. That's going to take forever, so I'm just going to close it. That is the supplemental stuff. So the AFD contains a boatload of information on it. So the supplemental volume stuff that I closed out because it was going to take too long to download will contain things like special VFR procedures, a map of Disney World for some reason. Don't ask why, but it's there. It contains VOR receiver checkpoints. It contains VOR testing checkpoints. You'll find sometimes they'll have controlled firing areas listed there. A fuck ton of information is there. It's just very, very useful. We go over a bit of it in a later video, but this video is getting too long, and we've covered what we set out to cover, which is VFR Sectionals. So now I hope you have an idea, a bit easier, how to read VFR Sectionals. I know this was a long video, so I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.